welcome to the Introduction to the Law of One. My name is Pamela, and I will be bringing you through this course. And we are going to start with just a short presentation about what the Law of One is, how it came to us, and who Ra is. Because if you don't have any kind of backstory, you're going to get really lost in the first session. So please, everyone, I'm glad that you're all here and listening to this first lesson before we get started. So we're going to jump into it. I'm going to share my screen to have a little bit of a visual. Here we go. Okay. And yeah, that's good. So LL Research Team is the name of the team that brought us the Law of One raw material. So LL Research Team stands for Love and Light. And by the end of this course, you are going to have the most fundamental understanding of what love and light means. You hear it all the time in the spiritual community, but people just kind of say it without really having an understanding about why we say it. And Ra really does explain it in these sessions very well. And you will, you're going to understand it more than anyone else you know understands love and light. So there are three people that were fundamental and involved in bringing us this material. We have Carla Ruckert, Don Elkins, and Jim McCarty. So these pictures are actually from the LL Research website. And this picture right here of the three of them together, this is actually only one of two pictures in existence of all three of them together. And you can just see in the center here, we have Don. And Don was 6'5". He was a very tall man, and he was absolutely brilliant. And we have Carla here and Jim. So let's get into a little bit of the backstories of these three individuals that brought us this material. Let's start with Don. So Don, if you can see just a little bit of his resume here, he was an absolutely brilliant man. You know, he had a Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science in Technical Engineering and a Master's in general engineering. I mean, just that alone. But he was also the head of the Universities of Alaska's Mechanical Engineering Department. You know, I don't know. I've never met anyone with academics like Don in my life. So, and he was the professor of physics and engineering at the University of Louisville, Kentucky. And that is very key when we were talking about how the contact with Ra was done and how the Law of One came to us, because while he was a professor at that university in the 60s is when he started the experiments for meditation and channeling with his students. He had 12 students that he did channeling with, and all those students came from when he was teaching there. So it was very, significant that he was a professor there. And he was also in the Korean War. He made it all the way to Master Sergeant. And after he left the Army, he was a pilot. And he was a pilot, I think, because he was so interested in UFOs. He became a pilot because he wanted to find UFOs and chase them. He heard a story when he was a child about a pilot chasing a UFO, and it sparked something in him to want to find aliens and find UFOs, and when he was younger. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why he became a pilot. So next we have Carla. When we go through the books, Carla is the instrument. We'll get into what that means. And Carla as well had quite the resume, a bachelor's degree in English literature and a master's degree in library services. So she worked at many universities, libraries across the country before she went and worked full-time with Don when he started doing his research on channeling and trying to communicate with other entities that were not here on Earth. And she was a channeler between 1974 and 2011. She had major back injuries, which pretty much made her have to quit. And just a few years later, she died. Now, she channeled for like 37 years total. And for those years, she was channeling Ra. And we're going to get into how different the Ra channeling actually was. And she was a brilliant writer too. She wrote over 70, almost 70 books, over 60 books she wrote that she's credited with. That she worked on with Don. And then after Don died, a lot of those books were worked with Jim. And she married Jim. After the Ra contact ended, about 3 years later, she married Jim. So let's talk about Jim for a little bit, because he was absolutely essential essential in contacting Ra. They wouldn't have contacted Ra without him. He needed to harmonize the group. Okay, so we have like three characters here. We have Dawn, Carla, and Jim. So when you're channeling, we'll talk about what channeling is just for a second here. There's many different types of channeling. So you can be channeling almost like people that are being hypnotized. You know, they're still in their body, they're still aware. You can't make them do anything. They're saying things and they're pulling things from like the ether and other places and expressing it. When you ask someone who's in a meditative state and you're asking, say, about their past lives and things like that, they can reach this information. This information can come through, and that's like the first level of like channeling, right? The level before that would be like just meditating and seeing what comes to you when you're meditating. Again, you're very much in your body. And there's different levels of channeling as well. So there's a type of channeling like Abraham Hicks, you know, where, and I'm going to use the analogy of like driving a car. Like if your body is a car and you are the consciousness that's driving that car, we're going to kind of stick with this analogy because I think it works a little bit for the type of channeling that can be done. So Abraham Hicks, if you ever have seen her, she's walking back and forth across the stage and she's talking and she's channeling Abraham. And so that's kind of like she's still in the car, she's driving the car, but she's got a passenger giving her directions about where to go. It's that type of channeling. So when you're asking a question, you're driving the car, but you're trying to be silent and just let them speak. It's a bit like that. And then there's other types of very deep trance channeling that is done. And I've seen many people do this, like Sam, the illusionist. You know, he's lying down, he's in a trance, and the messages that are coming in, he's still in the car, but he's not driving. He's the passenger trying to just be a passenger while someone else is driving, but you're still in the car. Okay. And that is like pretty much the top channeling that mostly is done today. But in the raw sessions, there was something significant that happened, and it was because of Jim, because he was able to put a harmonizing focus within the group and bathe Carla in love and life and protect her so she can actually stop the car, get out, close the door, and let Ra take the car and drive it without even her in it. And that's basically the kind of channeling she was in. Her consciousness was unplugged from her body and held in suspense with the Ra collective. And Ra come in and plugged in to her body and then used her body and played her vocal cords like an instrument. And they call Carla the instrument throughout the books because that is what's happening. And it's actually very rare for that to happen because you need the perfect conditions in a harmonized environment. So it's kind of like when you have one person, it's like ambient energy, but when you have two, it can oscillate. But when you can three, it can harmonize and like spin like a vortex. And that was needed in order to channel Ra in, because you can only do it when it's in a safe environment. You cannot exit your body the way Carla did unless you are being protected, because even in the fourth book, they always had a negative entity from the Orion group, and I think it was in the fifth density that was trying to disrupt the work that they were doing. So you need to be in a safe place. And you also need people to do things like maybe touch your hand at the right moment in case to bring Carla back into her body when she needs to, if she was in danger, things like this. So that is really a reason why this channeling session with Ra was so significant. The conditions were perfect, and the thing is, Dawn died in 1984. So when Dawn died, the harmony of the three was lost and the Ra contact was lost. So they were able to channel Ra again, but again, it wasn't the same type of channeling session that was originally done, because you can channel Ra, but you're not channeling Ra directly. Instead, you're playing telephone with the message from Ra, from sixth density, and use Carla as an instrument to say it. So they knew how significant it was when they were channeling Ra. They knew how special it was, and it was like what they basically incarnated on Earth to do. So let's go to the next slide here. So let's talk a little bit about how these three individuals came together and how this magical moment happened when Ra came through Carla. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier in 1948. That's when Don heard about a pilot that was chasing a UFO out of the atmosphere. And that's when he kind of first knew that aliens exist, UFOs exist. And this is kind of what made Don want to be a pilot as well. This pilot, Captain Thomas Mintel, he died in the crash. He went so high up into the atmosphere, he lost oxygen, he froze, he passed out, and he came crashing down. But that's what sparked this fire in Dawn to channel Ra and do this work. So in 1961, Dawn met Hal Price. Now, Hal Price was one of the people that were doing channeling groups to try to communicate with UFOs, because there's a lot of people that get abducted from aliens. They get brought back, and they still have telepathy contact with their abductors long after they got brought back. And they were able to communicate better with their abductors when they were doing channeling sessions. And they put a lot of this notes and their procedures in the brown notebook. And in 1961, that's when Don got it. And that's when Don decided to conduct his own experiments. So he was a professor at the University of Louisville, Kentucky, and he took 12 of his students to start an experiment. And he didn't really give his students really a lot of information about what they were doing. They just knew they were part of an experiment to go into meditation every Sunday and then learn how to do trance and learn how to receive messages, whatever messages they were. They weren't really guided much at all, right? There wasn't they were refining a procedure of how to go into trance and how to invite someone in to use them as an instrument for channeling. And so that experiment started, and one of the students from this group of 12 was dating Carla, and Carla was loved meditation and did it all the time and wanted to join the group. And then she came in as a meditator and joined the group, but she stayed on long after the original 12 were gone. People would come in and out all the time, but Carla was the fixture that stayed. And in 1962 is when they started those experiments, and Carla was the 13th member and the only female. So let's do, oh, I love this picture. I love this picture. This is a picture of Carla and Don in the early days after they had published, I think, their second book. The book that Don is holding is, I think, The Secrets to the UFOs. They wrote so many books. Again, Carla was credited with over 60 books, right? And this is one of them that Don is holding. And you notice that Don's not smiling. They even mention on their site that he went Vulcan, like in Star Trek, where you try to have no emotions. You approach everything without emotion. You just want the information. He was an engineer, he was analytical, and that was his persona always. He was Vulcan. So in 1968, Don moves in with Carla. And it wasn't until, look at that, 1974, until Carla started channeling herself. So she's doing decades of meditation before she actually tried to channel, because it's very different, right? Like we discussed. So Carla was able to go into deep trance. It's kind of like, some people can't be hypnotized or some people can't meditate. Carla can go not only under, she can leave her body completely under the right conditions. So she was like born for this, right? And let's see, several years later, it wasn't until 1978 where Jim meets Carla and then Don. So Jim had heard about the work that Carla and Don were doing with UFO research. And of course, Jim was very interested in aliens and UFOs as well. And for a few months, Jim traveled to Don and Carla to join their meditations on Sundays. And he did that for quite a bit until he decided to commit and move in with Carla and Don. And it was only 3 weeks after that they had their first contact with Ra. So it tells you a little bit about how important Jim was to harmonize that group to make that contact with Ra. And then Don passed away in 1984, and that's when the contact with Ra was lost. And Carla passed away in 2015. And at 71, she couldn't channel for the last few days of her life because her back was, she had so many surgeries and fusions in her back. It was horrible. And I left this picture up because the kind of channeling that gets done when you actually leave your body and allow someone else to use it as an instrument, you would think that, oh, you're just lying still, you're not using any energy, but you're using monumental energy in this transfer. You look how skinny she is. She went down to 84 pounds in doing these channeling sessions. It's extremely hard on your body to do this type of channeling, you know and she was really sacrificing herself almost to the point of being a martyr to channel Ra, because she was so committed to serve and knew how important this work was. So I put that picture up there because it looks like they're like falling in love and stuff, and I think it's cute. So that is the timeline, and here's just a few pictures of the setup when they were channeling Ra. The first picture here is Jim, and he's combing Carla's hair, and they had to get so many things absolutely perfect to make a clear transmission with Ra, because he's coming in 6th density, and we'll get into how the significance of that. But when you're channeling something from so far out of your reality and your density, it's like tuning a radio that you're trying to pick up a radio signal from a different planet in a different solar system. Like that's basically the trouble that you're going through trying to channel an entity like Ra. And the hair is actually important because it works a little bit like an antenna when you're channeling. Right, so he's combing her hair there. And then there was another picture of where Jim sits while Carla is in trance, because he's putting the whole room in love and light, and he's in a meditative state. And if he wasn't there, they wouldn't have been able to channel Ra. And then at the bottom picture there, you have Don, and Don is in a recliner where he has got his notebook with all his questions that he's going to ask Ra. And you can actually go onto a research website and take a look at his notebooks and all his writings. It's kind of interesting and very messy, very messy. And then we have another picture to the right of Carla, and she has got 3 microphones taped to her blanket chest there, because they didn't want to just have 2 microphones, because what if they both failed? They needed 3. They always wanted to make sure they captured every word during the sessions. And then behind her, they had the things that were really instrumental in making sure that Carla was put in a safe place. So she has her Bible. She was very religious. She had a Bible put into a passage that gave her the right feeling, the right frequency in order to channel Ra. And then we have the candle, and incense is always great to clear the energies. And then we have the chalice of water, where you can actually focus on water, just like Dr. Emoto, where he can change the frequency of water by writing words on it, or focusing or talking to it. So that's what that chalice is there for, because the whole room is being worked on to create this environment of safety and love and light. And Carla would drink that water at the end of each session. So those were all very important parts. So let's get into who Ra is. All this stuff about all these people and how they come together, and everything is so perfect. And now we're going to channel Ra from the 6th density. And what is that? What does that mean? So always have an open mind, before we get into these first sessions and listen to Ra. So Ra is Venusian. Okay, he's from Venus, and he is a social memory complex, right? And you're going to hear social memory complex several times in these books. And what that is think of it as when Ra was in 3rd density. He's in 6th density. He used to be in 3rd, and we will someday be in 6th density where Ra is. But Ra was in 3rd density 2.6 billion years ago. Okay, that tells you how advanced Ra is, right? Think about where we are going to be in 2.6 billion years in the future. We'll probably not be as far advanced as Ra, because we're not exactly overachievers here on Earth, but we're going to get there. And when we do, things happen when you go to 4th and 5th and 6th density. And that's basically what a lot of these books are about, is describing the architectural spiritual universe, right? And it's what Ra is giving us. So in 6th density, it's like when you have spent billions of years with kind of individuals, your soul family. Think about the population of the entire planet of Venus, kind of at the time had been together so long and so harmonized. You love each other so much and you know so much about each other. After billions of years, you know, you don't want to be separate from them anymore. You know, when you love, like you see it sometimes with couples, they're always together. It's like they might as well inhabit the same body, and that way they'll never be apart. So it's kind of like a harmonization like that, but with 6.5 million people all coming together. And when that happens, you give up every memory that you've ever had in any lifetime you've ever lived over billions of years. And all those frequencies come together and coalesce into one body that is called a social memory complex. And that is what Ra is. So Ra was very harmonized in third density to go into fourth. We're struggling here on Earth a lot. And a lot of third density planets don't make it through third density to fourth. Okay, a lot of them destroy themselves along the way, and we almost did, but we made it. We made it by the scrape of our chin. We made it. Okay, and so we're going to listen to a little bit about the differences between what it was like for Ra to go through third density and comparative to us in third density and into fourth. So Ra is actually in late sixth density. You know, sixth density, I think, is 50 million years, 75 million years. You'll have to look at my website. And in just 2.5 million years, Ra will be in seventh. And in seventh density, you're not actually a social memory complex anymore. You're oneness with all of creation. There is an eighth density, but that's the same as first as well. So these are the details of the spiritual architecture of our universe that we're going to learn in this course and what Ra gave to us. So I hope this introduction gives you a little bit of an idea about how we got this information, a little bit about what the law of one is, and who Ra is that gave us he's a humble messenger of the law of one, is what he calls himself when he's describing to the group about, like, who is this? You know, it had been significant after, you know, over a decade of meditation and channeling and different messages and entities to harmonize the group perfectly. And all of a sudden, out of Carla said the words, "I am Ra." And they knew they had something. They had contact with something significant. And they knew it at the time. And that's why they went through such lengths to make the most of it every single time Carla went into trance. And it took a physics professor to be able to come up with the questions to ask Ra, because Ra will not, he will not break our free will. He will not offer information. You have to ask him. And not only that, you have to keep yourself such aligned to ask questions that only pertain to the law of one. Otherwise, contact with Ra would have been lost. And that's where the brilliance of Dawn really came into the group, knowing how to ask questions and actually ask the right questions about topics that no one's ever heard of before in our, you know, general lifetime. So this is a body of work that is, I think, very special and pristine, the most pristine body of work that we can get for the answers and the keys to the universe. So that is the introduction. Let's, now that you have a little bit of a groundwork, now that when we go into book one, session one, you won't be hopefully completely lost, and you will be able to have a bit of a smoother journey through the law of one as you begin your awakening into this material. So I will see you in book one, session one. Thank you, everybody, and I will be happy to answer your questions in the chat.